Today is an ordinary day just like any other until it's no longer ordinary. A black woman walks into the courtroom with a calm demeanor, unaware that she will be tortured right in the place she thought was the safest. Can you guess who she is? An ordinary citizen. Not at all. She is the one who will make this entire system stand still cold, waiting for the wrath of justice. Don't go anywhere because you won't be able to guess how this story ends. Let us know where you are and what time it is when you watch this story. Leave a comment under the video. The sun slowly rises above the horizon, bringing the first rays of a new day, shining down on the old oak trees in the grounds of the federal courthouse in Atlanta. Jessica Blake walks up the old stone steps with a confident demeanor, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. The sound of her high heels echoes steadily against the hard stone surface. The light reflects off the oak trees, highlighting her dark blue suit and her delicate white blouse. A contemporary woman, intelligent and powerful, entering one of the country's greatest structures of justice. It seemed as though everything would harmonize and she would receive the respect deserved for her position. But the truth was not that simple. Jessica, a 38-year-old black judge, enters the courtroom with calmness, radiating from each step. Yet no one realizes she is the one who will completely alter the perception of justice. No one sees her as the one who truly holds power in the courtroom. She walks in like an ordinary citizen, not flaunting her authority, not showing the appearance of a judge, simply someone doing their job. But it seems that the people present here do not recognize her as a part of the system. They do not see her as the one who can make the seemingly solid walls of racism crumble. From the moment she enters the door, a look of contempt appears on John Taylor's face, a security officer with a cold and authoritative attitude. He doesn't even bother to look at the papers she hands over, simply tossing them into his bag and ordering Depp out of line. Jessica pauses for a brief moment, but it's enough for her to notice the difference in his attitude. A feeling of discomfort takes over her. She looks him straight in the eye and confidently asks, "Is there a problem, sir?" But he doesn't respond immediately. His eyes scan Jessica from her neatly tied black hair to her dark blue suit and neatly pressed trousers. He seems to be inspecting every detail of her appearance. Then his gaze stops at one point, her skin color. In Taylor's world, there are those who deserve respect and those who do not. Jessica was not on the list of people he valued. She was just a black woman walking into a space that he felt he had the right to control. "No ID. You can't just walk into this courthouse like that," Taylor sneered, extending his hand to stop her. Jessica didn't appear scared, nor did she show fear. She calmly pulled out her judge's card from her jacket pocket and handed it to him. This was her license to practice certifying her as someone with legal authority in this courthouse. But what was notable was that Taylor didn't even look at the card. He just took it indifferently, glanced at it, and tossed it into his bag without returning it. To him, documents were mere objects of no worth, not deserving of his respect. Jessica smiled wryly but firmly. "I want that card back." Taylor did not respond, but instead he stepped closer to her, so close that she could feel his breath. His words hit her like a slap to the face. "No matter how much in a hurry you are, you can't bypass my procedure. And this is a random check. Take her to the examination room." Jessica stepped closer without showing any sign of worry or fear. She was not someone easily threatened. Instead, she suddenly realized the clear racism in Taylor's attitude. And in that moment, a feeling she couldn't shake rose within her. This was not the first time she had faced such discrimination, but it always hurt, especially when it occurred in a place she had dedicated herself to. As soon as she stepped into the examination room, the atmosphere changed entirely. The room was dark and cold. The bare concrete walls had no windows, and there was only a metal chair in the center of the room, with a small table that held some examination tools. On the table lay a pair of scissors lying still as if waiting for its task. Jessica felt as though she were imprisoned, deprived of the freedom she rightfully deserved. "There is no reason for me to be detained," she asserted, her voice unwavering. "You don't have the right to hold me here without a legal reason. You're acting as if I'm a criminal." Taylor turned to look at her, his expression unchanged. "You don't need to say anything more," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Just follow my procedure." Before they could react, two other men entered the room. One quickly grabbed Jessica's left arm while the other shoved the chair hard into her back, preventing her from standing. Taylor's fingers clenched tightly around the scissors. His hands began to move through the air as if preparing to carry out a normal task. A task that, in his world, a black woman like Jessica deserved only this much respect for. The cold sensation of the scissors brushing against her hair made her heart race. Each strand of hair falling was like a piece of her history and dignity, being torn apart piece by piece. No cries, no resistance. Jessica sat silently, as firm as a rock. She did not allow herself to be weak, knowing that one moment of vulnerability could cost her everything she had fought for. Suddenly, a mocking laugh echoed from behind. "She looks better now, doesn't she?" A sarcastic voice said. "She needs a little respect," Taylor said, bending down to scoop up the fallen strands of hair. At that moment, Jessica couldn't help but feel the full violation of humiliation. But inside her, a flame of anger smoldered. She clenched her fists in her lap, but when she spoke, her voice was cold and full of defiance. "You will regret this," and in just a moment, the attack stopped. Taylor opened the door and mockingly ordered, "You can go now. The courtroom is over there." Jessica slowly stood up, walked out of the room, revealing no sign of weakness. She had taken back her judge's card from Taylor, without any reminder. But inside her, what she felt was not simple outrage, but a greater goal, a goal that would make the entire system crumble. For when she walked out of there, no one knew that she was the one with the only power capable of changing everything. She was not the victim in this story, but the one who would create the change that society needed to face. The story was not over. It had only just begun. Jessica Blake did not resist. She sat there silently, watching her hair fall to the ground as if witnessing a part of herself being torn apart. No complaints, no noise. She only felt each strand cut off, each bit of her dignity. Stolen, the examination room was cold. The light in the room was too weak to illuminate the darkness of what was happening. All that could be heard was the clicking sound of the scissors, each snip cutting through the air like an inexplicable challenge. Jessica did not feel pain, at least not physically, but the sense of loss of her soul, her honor, and her dignity was what made her feel as if she were being torn apart piece by piece. "This is a meaningless act," she thought to herself. But Jessica did not cry out, did not struggle. She was a judge, someone who had learned to restrain herself in the most stressful situations. Yet inside her, an ever-growing fire of anger burned, a wave of emotion rising like violent waves in an ocean beyond her control. The feeling of losing her hair was as though a part of herself was being taken away. But it was not just a physical loss. She realized that this was not just about her hair being cut. This was an invasion of her power, of her identity, and more importantly, of the system she had dedicated her life to serving. The scissors continued their work. Each snip a blow to her self-respect, to her honor. Each strand of hair falling was not just a material loss, but a clear statement that this society had no place for people like her. Not because she lacked capability, not because she lacked virtue, but simply because she was a Black woman. But then when she looked into the mirror opposite her, when the last strands of hair fell, Jessica realized something important. She was not just a victim who had lost her hair. She was a victim of the very social system that had long viewed people like her as inferior. This was not just about losing hair, but about being humiliated and degraded, being treated as someone unworthy of respect, as an object with no right to a voice. Do we live in a society like this? She asked herself, a painful and disillusioned question, but she could not step back. She had to stand up. She had to fight Taylor. The man with the cold expression still stood there, smiling mockingly, watching her hair fall. Jessica's hair was not just a symbol of beauty or a part of her body. It was a sign of her resilience, of the strong sense of self she had built over her life. Now all that remained was the rawness, not only physically but spiritually. Her hair fell like stones, shattering under Taylor's emotionless gaze. The whole room was filled with the sound of the scissors cutting hair. But Jessica remained still, not crying, not angry. She felt the anger rising inside her, but she did not let it overwhelm her. She had gone through so many trials in her life and had learned to stay calm in the most difficult situations. It was in this moment that Jessica realized that the respect of others for her could not be taken away just because of her hair or her skin color. No matter how much Taylor cut her hair, no matter how much he tortured her, she was still a judge, still someone with power in the courtroom. No one could steal the respect she had earned through her abilities and efforts. When the last scissor cut was made, Taylor stood up and smiled as if feeling victorious. But Jessica didn't look at him. She had no time for his games. She stood up, took back her judge's card without needing to ask. She walked out of the room with a steady step, though she still felt the hurt inside her. But this was the moment she understood that what had happened today was not just a personal violation. It was part of a bigger battle, a battle against discrimination, against the irrational and cruel actions that society imposed on people like her. Jessica knew that what she was going through would not be easy, but she also knew that she could not stop. She looked at the surroundings of the courthouse like a stranger entering a world that would never welcome her. But today, everything would be different. She was not just a judge. She was the one who would make all those who had once looked down on her realize that they were wrong. She would not let anyone destroy what she had built. Each step she took was a commitment to herself and to those who had believed in her. Her hair might have been cut off, but her dignity could not be taken away. She would continue to fight for justice for people like her, for those who had no voice in this society. Jessica Blake was not a victim. She was a warrior, and her fight had only just begun. Jessica Blake did not stop. Her hair may have been cut, but her resilience remained intact. More than ever, she felt stronger than ever. The torment she had endured was not only physical, but was inflicted by a system, a society that had been treating her as someone with no rights, no voice. But today, everything would be different. Today, she would stand in her judge's seat where she would become a symbol of justice, not a victim, but the one who presides and makes powerful rulings. Jessica walked into the courtroom, her footsteps echoing on the cold-tiled floor. These footsteps were not of a woman who had been humiliated, but of a woman with power, power that she had built and would defend to the end. She did not look back. She would not allow herself to lose focus. Only justice, only determination was her goal in this moment. The courtroom suddenly fell silent. Everyone present turned and watched her every step. Lawyers, reporters, the defendants, all of them were silent, too afraid to even breathe. A black woman with no hair sitting on the judge's chair like an unshakable statue. Their gazes were not only of surprise, but of clear recognition of the power she now held. Jessica did not stop, nor did she let her emotions cloud her vision. She walked toward the judge's chair and sat down like a queen, like someone all must respect. She did not need a grand proclamation, did not need to raise her voice in reproach. She did not need to do what society expected of her. She simply needed to sit down and announce the case at hand. That alone was enough to make everyone in the courtroom realize who she was. Everything had changed, not just because she was a judge, but because of how she was a judge. A black woman sitting on the judge's chair, a place where no one had ever thought someone like her could belong. But today everything had changed. She was not just an ordinary woman. She was the one changing the system from within powerfully and decisively. Jessica did not look up, did not look at the people in the room. She could feel their eyes on her, but she did not need to respond. She was not a puppet in a play they wished to set up. She was the one making the decisions, and she would do everything to ensure justice was served. Justice was not an abstract idea. Justice was the truth, the actions that no one could deny. She announced to the people in the room the case that was taking place. She did not need to make those sitting in the room feel comfortable. She simply needed to do her job, and she would make all those who once thought they could easily bypass justice understand that they were wrong. The eyes of the people in the room never left her. There was doubt, there was fear, but there was also respect. They knew they were facing someone they could not violate. They could challenge, they could try to make things difficult, but in the end, they would realize that Jessica was not someone easily defeated, and she would not forgive anyone who had harmed her. When the trial began, Jessica did not need to say anything more. She looked directly at the lawyers, directly at the defendants. She felt the tension in the air, but she did not care. She was the one making the decisions today, and she would not allow anyone to distract her from her goal. She was not subdued. She did not allow the earlier brutal acts to influence her decisions. Jessica understood that justice was not always easy, but it was something she had to do. She would never back down from scorn, from discrimination. Today, she would make those who had once imposed injustice upon her regret. Each word she spoke in the courtroom, each decision she made carried a power that no one could ignore. It was not just about this case, but about all the other cases the people deprived of their rights and respect just because of their skin color or their background. She was not only fighting for her own justice, but for all those who had been oppressed, for all those who had been looked down upon simply because they were different. Jessica was not just a judge. She was a symbol of perseverance, of no compromise, of justice. She stood there not only for herself, but for all those who had been forgotten. Justice was not something that a few people could take for themselves. Justice was the right of everyone, and Jessica would be the one to ensure that. When the trial ended, Jessica did not rush to leave. She knew this was just the first step. Justice was not a battle that could be won in one day. But today she had won the first victory, and this victory would be the driving force for her to continue the long fight. She was not afraid of solitude, not afraid of being ostracized, not afraid of being criticized. She feared only one thing: not doing enough, not doing it right, letting the wrongdoers continue to oppress the innocent. And today she would not let that happen. The air in the courtroom still held the tense breath as if a storm were waiting to erupt at any moment. Jessica Blake seated firmly in the judge's chair, her cold gaze shining with unshakable determination. She knew this was just the beginning. The truth had not yet been fully revealed, and the dark secrets of the system, which she had once been a victim of, would now have to face the light of justice. At this moment, the courtroom was silent enough to hear the faintest sound. Everyone's attention was on Jessica. She could feel the pressure from those around her, but that only made her more resolute. Every time she paused, it was like a challenge to those who had once looked down on her. The testimonies to come would be the deciding factor, and Jessica knew she could not allow any cover-up to remain. "Next, I request to call the witness." She ordered, her voice calm but sharp. All attention in the courtroom was now focused on the next witness. The courtroom door opened and a man stepped in, his weathered face but determined eyes. Howard Briggs, a father standing before the judge, not because he sought revenge, but because he sought justice for his son. This man had witnessed a heartbreaking scene and loss, watching his 17-year-old son being brutally beaten by the police during a peaceful protest. "Good afternoon, Mr. Briggs. We are ready to hear your testimony." Jessica spoke, her eyes never leaving the man standing there. Howard Briggs, with his stern face and broken breath, nodded, feeling the respect in Jessica's words. She did not look at him as a victim, but as someone with a right to speak. Howard sat down in the witness chair, his hands shaking, but not out of fear, but out of the pain that had never been acknowledged. He looked at Jessica once more, then began telling his story. His voice was hoarse, full of pent-up anger. "My son James was protesting against the oppression that we, Black people, face every day. It was a peaceful protest, no violence, just chants demanding justice. But we never expected that the violence would come from those tasked with protecting justice." Officer Taylor and his colleagues did things beyond imagination. Jessica sat silently, her eyes never leaving Howard. Every word, every sentence of his pierced her heart, for it was her story. Her story of the brutality of a system that had discarded people, treating them like nameless numbers. Howard continued, each word heavy, as if unloading a lifetime of burden. James was attacked while standing up to call for peace. They pushed him to the ground, kicked him in the stomach, and one officer knelt on his neck, preventing him from breathing, and I saw it happen. My son almost died because of their actions, and when the footage was released, they were not punished. They just went on with cheap excuses as if it was nothing. Every word of Howard was like a dagger to those sitting in the courtroom, especially those in power. Jessica could clearly see the faces of those in the room, some turned away, some too afraid to look directly. But in her eyes, determination had ignited. No testimony would be ignored. No truth would be concealed. When Howard stopped, Jessica did not rush. She waited a few seconds for the room to settle. She knew each testimony was part of her uncompromising fight. She took her pen, made a note in her notebook, then looked directly at Howard, her gaze filled with respect. "You've witnessed a heartbreaking event, but today your voice will not be drowned in silence." Jessica spoke not to comfort, but to affirm the strength of the truth. She continued, "We will not let these acts of violence be forgotten, and you will not have to fight alone. Those in power must be held accountable." Each of Jessica's words was a powerful promise. The courtroom was silent, but in that atmosphere, a clear shift had occurred. No one could ever again look down on people like Jessica. They could fear, they could oppose, but in the end, justice would prevail. When Howard stood up, he turned back and looked at Jessica. His eyes were filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Judge Blake. I just want my son to live in a world of fairness." Jessica did not speak, only nodded. In that moment, she knew that justice was not just an abstract concept, but a long, hard-fought battle, and she would fight until the end. Howard Briggs' testimony was not just the words of a grieving father, but a warning to all those who thought they could continue living in concealment and silence. Jessica returned to her work. The trial continued, but she felt she had achieved something monumental. She had not only changed her own fate, but she was changing the system. She was the one holding the key to unlock the door of justice. The courtroom remained silent, as if a powerful wave was quietly rising, preparing to crash down on everything. Jessica Blake, the judge of the day, sat firmly in the judge's chair. With a cold, sharp gaze, it seemed nothing could shake her. But the truth always has a strange power. And Jessica knew that as long as the truth had not been fully exposed, she could not stop. After facing Officer John Taylor, who had insulted and tortured her in the examination room, Jessica felt like a fire had ignited inside her. Not only because of what Taylor had done to her, but because of the silence that enveloped the system, the brutal concealment that had existed for so long. This system, which she had once trusted, was now the enemy she needed to fight. And Jessica was ready. Not just the recent cases, but Jessica began to dig into old files, searching for forgotten traces, for testimonies that had been ignored. She was not just a judge, she was a warrior, unyielding in the face of wrongdoing. She did not want to merely punish the criminals. She wanted this system to pay for its corruption. One morning when the courthouse was still in chaos, Jessica decided to continue her search for the truth. She began reviewing old complaints she had stumbled upon in internal documents, silent calls, forgotten petitions, filled with hope. Each file she reviewed felt like a dagger piercing into the very system she had once been a part of. After a long search, she discovered that at least 12 complaints had been overlooked over the years. Complaints related to Officer Taylor. His acts of violence during protests, accusations that were never investigated and were quickly dismissed. The names on those complaints were no one other than the people Jessica had met in her courtroom. People she had once thought were victims, but who were actually concealed by a system of power. Jessica stared at the complaints, the blood-filled lines of those oppressed, with no one speaking out to protect them. She felt their pain, their anger, and their disappointment. These were people pushed to the margins of society, deprived of their human rights simply because of their skin color. They were not just nameless entries in files, but lives crushed by the very system that was supposed to protect them. One of the complaints that particularly caught Jessica's attention was from a man named Charles Davis. He was a black citizen who had been attacked by Officer Taylor during a protest 4 years ago. Charles had filed a complaint right after he was beaten and threatened while simply participating in a peaceful protest. However, his complaint was swiftly dismissed, and no one in the system took responsibility for Officer Taylor's actions. Jessica clenched her fists, her fingers gripping her hand as a sign of determination. She would not let these names, these pains be forgotten again. She would not just face Officer Taylor, but also confront those within the system who had protected him for all these years. At this moment, Jessica was no longer just a judge in a courtroom. She was the one fighting for the oppressed, the one who would stand up for voices that could not speak. She knew there could be no mercy in this fight. Justice had to be served, and if the system could not correct itself, she would be the one to tear it down. When she returned to the courtroom later that afternoon, the tension no longer came only from the defendants, but also from those who defended this system, those who had quietly abetted these injustices for so many years. Jessica walked into the courtroom unafraid. She stood firm in the face of opposition and the discontent of those in the court, but in her eyes there was no fear, only a powerful determination to uncover the truth. She called a series of witnesses, not those who had testified in the current case, but those who had information about the cover-ups in the past. Each of their testimonies shed more light on the injustice and corruption that had existed within this system. Those who had witnessed the events but had remained silent were now free to speak, thanks to Jessica's strength. But what Jessica faced was not just the witnesses. The defenders of the system, those who had long supported Officer Taylor, began to appear in the courtroom as well. They tried to delay, tried to derail the case, but Jessica would not let them deceive her. She turned and faced them directly without fear. Each step Jessica took was a challenge to those who had tried to protect the injustice. She was not only seeking to punish those who had committed crimes, but also to shatter a system that had protected wrongful acts for far too long. Silence was no longer a tool of protection. She had begun to fight not just for herself, but for everyone who had been overlooked and forgotten in the dark. The testimonies today were not just words spoken in a courtroom. They were strikes against the very power structure that had long defied justice. The criminals were not just Officer Taylor, but everyone who stood behind these human rights violations. And Jessica, the black woman, the powerful judge, was the only one capable of overthrowing them. The courtroom remained silent, as if no one dared to breathe, with only the sound of Jessica's footsteps echoing on the cold tile floor. These were not just the footsteps of a judge, but the sound of change. She stood before the court, staring intently at the familiar faces sitting silently before her. The lawyers, the officials in the courtroom. Everyone stopped all activity as she entered. No one dared speak because at this moment, she was the one holding the power, not them. Jessica knew that the time had come for it all to end. The battle was not just between her and a police officer or a few individuals who had committed crimes. It was a battle between justice and a system that had long protected those who abused power. This system had been tainted by silence, by the complicity of those in power, and Jessica was the only one brave enough to confront and reveal the truth. She paused for a moment, her hand gripping the gavel, gently striking it 3 times on the judge's bench. Each strike echoed in the room like a declaration of war, a statement that justice would no longer be hidden. No more protection, no more sheltering behind power. She began to make bold decisions. This court, she said, her voice full of authority, but also cold, will no longer protect those who exploit their power to harm others. What you have done in the dark will no longer be concealed. All eyes in the courtroom were now on Jessica. She looked directly at the faces of those responsible, those in power who had allowed this system to persist despite knowing full well what was happening. She did not stop. She continued to clarify everything word by word, leaving no room for excuses or concealment. We have heard many testimonies today. Jessica said, her eyes not leaving the faces in front of her. But the truth is not just that. Every complaint, every voice ignored has been recorded in these files, and I will not let them be forgotten any longer. No one will be allowed to overlook these victims, no matter who they are. Officer Taylor was sitting at the back of the room, his eyes seemingly searching for an escape, but there was nowhere for him to hide. Jessica had known for a long time that he would not easily concede, but she was not afraid. She had stood up against an entire system, so facing him, just one part of that system, was nothing to fear. "Bring him here," Jessica ordered. At that moment, the atmosphere in the room seemed to freeze. People exchanged confused looks. Officer Taylor, who they had once thought was a pillar of the system, was now facing the possibility of losing everything. With the intervention of officers, Taylor was brought before the judge's bench, his eyes bloodshot with fear. "Hank Taylor." Jessica stared directly into his eyes, speaking slowly and deliberately. "Because of your actions, your behavior toward innocent people over the years, I am ordering your immediate arrest. An investigation will be conducted into you and all those who have protected you. This system will no longer protect you." The courtroom went completely still, as though a bomb had just been dropped, and everyone was waiting for the explosion. Those in power within the courtroom, who had once covered for Taylor's actions, now had nowhere to hide. They had to face the truth. Jessica stood firm in her role, not backing down from threats or resistance. She continued her declaration. "From this day forward, no one in this court will be allowed to remain silent in the face of injustice. Each individual, each case will be carefully examined without exception. This system can no longer tolerate brutality and racism." By now, everyone in the room could feel the powerful shift within Jessica. She was not just a judge enforcing justice. She was the one reigniting belief in a justice system that had been forgotten for too long. A system where no one should be overlooked because of their skin color or social standing. "Take him away," Jessica said coldly. Officer Taylor was handcuffed and dragged out of the courtroom, his eyes filled with defeat and regret. This was the first time in his life he had to face someone who truly wasn't afraid and would not accept injustice. Jessica watched him leave, but inside she did not feel joy or satisfaction. She knew that this was only the first step in a long battle. This system would not change in one day, but at least today people like Taylor could no longer hide in the shadows of protection. Then she turned to look at the others in the courtroom, the lawyers, the witnesses, the officials in the justice system. Everyone knew that this would not stop here. She had started this fight, and it would continue until justice was fully realized. Jessica stood up, looking across the courtroom once more and speaking again, her voice calm but resolute. "We will not allow justice to be hidden anymore. And from this day forward, those who seek to protect injustice will have to face the truth." She returned to her judge's chair, her eyes still shining, brightly full of faith in what she would do next. This was only the beginning. She would continue to fight for those victims who had not yet been heard, for those abandoned by the system. And she would never give up. After the investigation and the strong decisions regarding the arrest of Officer Taylor, Jessica stood firm in the judge's chair, her heart full of determination. She could feel a wave of tension in the courtroom. It wasn't just the silence following a major event, but a breakthrough change spreading through the room. Today, it wasn't just a case being decided, it was a turning point for justice. And Jessica was at the helm. She had fought through tense hours listening to each testimony of the witnesses and relentlessly battling against a system protecting those who abuse power. But today, she didn't just want to reveal the truth. She wanted to create a real change, a change that could permanently alter the functioning of this courtroom and perhaps the entire legal system. Now was the moment Jessica rose from the judge's chair and walked toward her desk. All eyes in the room turned toward her, their gazes filled with curiosity and hope. She picked up a thick file, opened it with determined hands. The light from the desk lamp illuminated her face, creating an almost legendary image. Jessica's eyes held no trace of hesitation. She knew that what she was about to announce would not just be a decision in this case, but a revolutionary change. We can no longer maintain a system in which racism is allowed to exist not just in the shadows, but even in the heart of the courts we call justice. Her voice rang out strong and unwavering. Everyone in the room listened intently, as if they couldn't afford to miss a single word. Jessica continued, "Today, I introduce a new policy, the Monroe Mandate, a set of mandatory rules designed to change how this court operates. This policy is not just a set of guidelines, but a commitment. Our commitment to justice, to equality, and to those who have suffered under injustice for far too long." A sense of tension rose in the room. Everyone knew this policy would not be easy to implement. It would require change from the very roots, and not everyone would be ready to change. But Jessica's words were like a storm, sweeping away all resistance. Every employee in this court, from the security staff to the judges, from the clerks to the lawyers, will be required to undergo anti-racism training. These courses will not just be theoretical, they will be practical lessons in fairness and empathy. No one will be allowed to sit on the sidelines. Every individual in this court must participate in the process of change. Everyone will undergo psychological tests, screenings to ensure they harbor no biases or prejudices. Evaluations will be conducted regularly to ensure that all of us, from those with the most power to those in the lowest positions, are committed to protecting fairness and the rights of every citizen. Each word from Jessica was like a deep cut into the old habits, the conservatism of the system. The courtroom fell silent. The air was tense, filled with anticipation. The eyes of the court staff, the lawyers, the powerful figures in the room. None of them could tear their gaze away from Jessica. She was changing everything, not with smooth words, but with concrete actions. Jessica was not just announcing a new policy. She was creating a revolution. A revolution where those who had been silenced for fear of judgment would now have the chance to be heard and protected. She had seen so many people pushed aside, discarded, simply because they had no power, simply because their skin color was different. Today, she would make everything change. The Monroe Mandate was not just a set of rules, it was a commitment to all those who had been deprived of their rights. A declaration that justice would no longer be controlled by those who abuse power to maintain injustice. No one in this courtroom could remain uninvolved, and I want everyone to remember one thing. Jessica continued, her voice resolute. It's not just the criminals who must be held accountable. This system, those who were complicit, those who stood silent when they saw injustice unfold, they too will pay the price. Silence is complicity, and from today, we will no longer stand in silence. Everyone could feel the power in her words. A major change was underway, and Jessica Blake was at the forefront, leading that revolution. The court staff, whether they wanted to or not, could not deny that this would change everything. No one could remain comfortable in the belief that they would be protected from the truth. When she introduced the Monroe Mandate, it wasn't just the staff in the courtroom who felt the shift. Even those outside who had been following the case from afar could feel the change, not just because of the regulations, but because Jessica had done what no one dared do. She had stood up against a system rife with discrimination and had protected those who abused power. This is not just the first step. This is a deep, widespread change that we must all carry out together starting today. Jessica concluded, her face cold but filled with a resolve. The courtroom was no longer a place of silence. It would be a place where every voice would be heard. And from today, everyone would be responsible for protecting justice instead of hiding in the shadows of fear. The system would never be the same again. Everyone in the courtroom understood that. The Monroe Mandate had been enacted, and no one could oppose it in the days following the announcement of the Monroe Mandate. Jessica Blake felt as if she had just emerged from a long battle, not just because of the fight in the courtroom, but because of the war against the prejudices and systems that had existed for decades. But now she was no longer alone. Change had begun, not just within the walls of the courthouse, but also in the hearts of the people who were becoming increasingly aware of the injustices they had long endured. They saw in Jessica a symbol of strength, resilience, and faith in justice. On that day, when the news of her victory echoed across the country, calls, invitations, and messages flooded in. But nothing could compare to the moment when Jessica was honored at the White House. She stepped onto the stage receiving the Justice Medal, a prestigious award not everyone gets the chance to receive. But for Jessica, it wasn't just an award for herself, it was a reward for all those who had been silenced, for all those who had endured racism, for all those who had never had the opportunity to speak up. As the medal was placed around her neck, the applause from the audience echoed like a powerful wave crashing against the shore. But Jessica was not someone who wanted to keep this moment to herself. She looked out at the crowd, seeing the faces of those who supported her, those who had fought alongside her. "This award is not just for me," she said in her brief speech. "It belongs to all of us, those who have been silenced, those who have been overlooked, and those who stood up when no one else would. It is the faith that we must preserve, the justice that we must protect. Today I stand here for all those who have lost their voices." Each word she spoke was like a wave breaking, dissolving every barrier that people once thought insurmountable. She wasn't just fighting for herself, but for everyone who had been trampled in the darkness of a racist system. And because of that, this award carried a meaning far beyond a personal symbol. It was a symbol of justice, sacrifice, and the spirit that would never bow down. The scene at the White House wasn't just an opportunity to celebrate Jessica's personal victory, but also a major step in the long journey of change. The people surrounding her, from high-ranking officials to ordinary citizens, could feel the power in her speech. Part of them could hardly believe that racism and the protection of those who abuse power still existed in society today. But thanks to Jessica's resolute actions, they saw that everything could change, and they felt hope reignited once again. Not long after receiving the award, Jessica continued her journey with a new mission: to inspire the younger generation, the ones who would shape the future. She accepted an invitation to a high school where she met with and spoke to the students, sharing her story and encouraging them to fight for justice. In this talk, Jessica didn't just recount her journey, but also conveyed a powerful message about courage, patience, and faith in the power of justice. "You all have the potential to change the world," Jessica told the attentive students. "Justice is not something that can be given to you. It is something you must fight for. You will face challenges, and there will be times when you feel like giving up. But if you have the courage to stand up, then justice will never be suppressed. Never forget that a drop of water can break a stone. You are those drops of water," her words moved the students. There were eyes filled with trust and determination. And then a small student from the back of the class stood up, clenched his fist, and said, "We will fight." Jessica smiled, knowing that one of those words would be fulfilled, and one day someone would rise for justice just as she had. When Jessica left the school that day, she couldn't help but feel a warmth in her heart. She knew she had sent an important message, and that no matter how rigid the system might be, change was still possible. That was justice. That was why she fought for her part. Jessica knew that her journey was far from over. She continued to work in the courthouse, continuing to stand strong against all challenges and maintaining the changes she had set in motion. No matter the difficulties that came, she would not back down. A judge was not just someone who enforced the law. They were the keeper of justice, protecting the vulnerable and helping those who could not speak for themselves. Looking back at her past, Jessica realized that she had not just been a winner in a single case. She was someone who had created change, opening a new door for those forgotten, those who had never been heard. And she would continue to fight because she knew that justice had never been truly perfect. But it could be a powerful tool to protect everyone if we never stopped fighting for it. That's why Jessica Blake will always be a symbol of justice, courage, and hope. Her story will never end, and it will continue to inspire future generations, those who will follow in her footsteps to ensure that justice will always be served regardless of race, religion, or gender. Jessica's story is not just about a resilient judge. It is about all of us, those who dare to stand up for justice, who will never accept injustice. Jessica Blake's story is not just the tale of a Black judge who endured racism and oppression. It is the story of inner strength, remarkable resilience, and the unyielding will of a woman in the fight against injustice. From moments of brutal violation, both physically and in terms of her dignity, to standing firm in her judge's seat, holding power not just to pass judgment, but to change a system, Jessica proved that justice is not only something we seek in courts, but something we create with the power of belief and courage. This story gives us all hope that no matter the challenges or obstacles, If we do not give up and do not bow to pressure, justice will ultimately triumph. And if one person can change a system that has existed for centuries, then nothing is impossible. Let this story remind us of the power of each individual to create change no matter where they come from, what their skin color is, or what gender they are. Justice can always be upheld, and as long as we have the courage to stand up fearlessly without backing down. You may not change the world immediately, but start with one small step and change will come. A whole system can fall from just one person daring to stand up. Never forget that when you fight for justice, you're not just fighting for yourself, but for all those who don't have a voice. If this story has touched your heart and inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing inspirational stories, life lessons, and the unstoppable power of justice.